Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 24th June 2020, and these are the articles we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled Transforming Education. This is about the writer's vision of ensuring that the education ushers in a green economy and inculcates the values of sustainable development. It is in this context that we have to remember that the Sustainable Development Goal 4.0 also talks about ensuring that the education is accessible to all. Now, when we are talking about how education is accessible to all, it is only important that we also recognize the fact that if this education inculcates the value of green economy and sustainable development right from the childhood, it is not possible to create a society which values this sustainable development. That is the central agenda of this article. At the heart of this idea of sustainable development is the understanding that the world is very interconnected. That means the actions taken up by one particular society will have an impact on the rest of the world. Now, how do I say this? There is no better example than the COVID-19 pandemic. So, even though it is debatable about the source of origin of this COVID-19 or the novel coronavirus, it is undisputed that it is caused by human interaction with wildlife and it has been unsustainable to say the least. So, ever since this COVID-19 lockdown has been imposed across the world, policy circles, economists and business magnates are talking about investing in green economy. What do you mean by this green economy? So, to give a simplistic idea, it is about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and ensuring that materials that we are using or natural resources that we are using are recycled. So, these are the key ideas or key philosophies that drive this agenda of green economy. That is reducing the emissions and ensuring that natural resources are recycled. Now, how do you create this green economy? There are two aspects to this. One is the policy angle, the other is actual implementation. Now, here comes the biggest challenge. How do you implement these policies? Policies can actually be made on paper, but unless and until there is acceptance among people, you cannot actually implement it. Sure, you can enforce certain laws, but this will yield very little results because the entire focus will be on enforcing this policy rather than people accepting it. You would waste a lot of time and energy in ensuring that people are complying with this. Rather than this, you have to give an incentive to the people to implement the policies. That is how effective governance should happen. Now, in order to ensure that there is growing acceptance, what is required is the value-based education. So, right from childhood, at least for the next generation, if the market is driven by choices, education plays a very important role in this choices. Now, in order to ensure that the next generation chooses this green economy and sustainable development as values, we have to remold our education systems. How do we ensure that? That forms the second part of the article. The author of this article gives various examples as to how we have to inculcate these values or put the seeds of sustainable development as a value in the early years of education. So, how do we teach history right now? If you take a look at our conventional textbooks, it is divided into various kingdoms. It is divided into the kinds of impact different wars had on societies. So, instead of this approach, the article suggests that what is the impact of a particular event. Like, say, in this article, the author takes the example of British railways. So, what is the impact of British railways which were introduced in India on ecology of our country? So, British railways were using the wood from Indian forests. So, what is the impact on deforestation? This is one line of thought that can be taught to students in the early years. When we talk about geography, instead of going by the conventional physical geography and human geography aspects, we have to focus on how human activities have changed the course of development and how it is impacted geographical landforms over a period of time. So that is the approach that this author suggests. Another example, she says that chemistry need not actually start from periodic table. Rather, if we take a look at the biogeochemical cycles and its impact on ecology, that should be the starting point in the early years of higher education. So in a way, everything should be related to ecology and sustainable development. Thus, the next generation will value this idea of sustainable development over the previously taught curriculum. So this should involve a systemic change in our curriculum and ensure that these values are propagated even at the state level and district levels as well. So there should be activities which promote this line of thinking. So for this, we have to use this opportunity of COVID-19 and educate the next generation about how business as usual approach or the growth at any cost approach will impact our lives. That is the key takeaway from this article. The next article for the day is taken from the Live Mint and it is titled India is grossly underinvested in studying its friends and foes. So this article highlights the necessity of a ecosystem which ushers a culture of scientific study of diplomatic studies and also political affairs. The reason why this article writer proposes this idea is because we have had a long history of conflicts that could have been settled if we understand our neighbors better and ensure that we can build our diplomatic capital and good diplomacy by enriching our standards of geopolitical thinking as well as focusing on the geopolitical outcomes that is based on real knowledge and strategic thinking. How do we gain this expertise? That is the focus of this article. The recent diplomatic response from the Indian government was criticized by opposition parties, especially that of Prime Minister Modi's diplomatic style, wherein he engages in a personal equation to deal with different countries. So it would be a mistake to say that personal equations don't really matter. They actually do, but that alone cannot drive our foreign policy. You cannot rely upon the charisma of a single individual to have a long lasting impact on the future generations. So it is in this case that the author highlights that we need to develop expertise on different domains which define our diplomatic relations with our neighbors as well as our adversaries, that is Pakistan and China. So what is the domains in which we have to develop our expertise? Firstly, we have to understand their culture. So when we mean their culture, we have to understand what is the present scenario which affects the rhetoric with respect to our country. What is the mood like? We have to understand the internal issues of a country and how it impacts their own foreign policy and how we should respond to that particular situation. This kind of deep understanding of cultures is actually there, but the problem is the diplomatic circles or the people involved in this diplomatic research are either leftist inclining or rightist inclining in the present regime. So what it will create is a lack of objectivity, because either the particular individual bias will force that individual to look at it through the lens of his ideology rather than focusing on the need of the hour. The second aspect is, whenever we are talking about education, there is a perception that people who are investing their time in the study of history or in the study of arts as such do not have a career. Now this needs to change, because India can certainly invest a lot of resources which are very objective in nature to ensure that more and more historians are created. There is a possibility that the future generations would not be interested in this career because they feel that there is no scope for a career. Now, if we strike at the root of this idea, we will be creating a culture where historians are encouraged. There might be a lot of individuals who are interested in actually studying history, but they are taking a step back because they don't see a scope for any sort of employment. Now, that should be curbed in the initial phases of education itself, and there should be a window of opportunity for this kind of students as well. The next thing is we have to understand the interests of a particular country. So, when I say interest, the priorities of foreign policy can be either driven by strategic interest, or it can be driven by economic interest, or sometimes even their idea of culture. So, in this case, in the case of China, it is influenced by all these factors. It is influenced by strategic reasons, their cultural reasons of establishing the Chinese civilization as a hegemony in the Southeast Asia region. And lastly, but not at all insignificant, is the fact that the political party that is in power in a country will definitely determine the stance it would take with respect to India. So, all these factors should be considered while designing our diplomatic replies in times of crisis. So, in order to develop expertise in these domains, the author suggests that we have to nurture the culture of a think tank dedicated to each of these aspects. So, when we do this, we will be developing domain expertise who would be contributing to the Ministry of External Affairs and thereby designing a concrete diplomatic policy. India does not have a foreign policy document which lays down the values of our country. So, this is the first step that we have to focus upon, so that it becomes the torchlight for future generations, in a way that it does not have to always rely upon the charisma of our national leader. Previously, it was Jawaharlal Nehru's aura that defined our foreign policy, and now the opposition parties allege that it is the charisma or it is the persona of our Prime Minister Modi which is defining the foreign policy choices. So, in order to avoid this kind of allegations, we have to develop domain expertise and create a foreign policy document, if not for all the future scenarios, but at least to lay down the values that India abides by. Sure, there are certain unwritten principles when we talk about our foreign policy, like non-aligned movement or the principles of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam or the ideals of Vishwaguru, which are reiterated by leaders at different points of time. But what would definitely help us is to have a concrete foreign policy document which documents the vision that India has for a particular region with respect to all these factors and how India wants to approach that. That is the gist of this article. To conclude, we have this institute called the IDSA, which brings out deep analysis with respect to our defense and security arrangement. But having said that, the understanding is often driven by the political circles, and sometimes, as the author says, there can be a lack of objectivity. Now, what is this objectivity? How do we ensure that our personal bias or the bias induced by thinkers in the strategic think tanks is not affecting our foreign policy choices? That is for the policy makers to decide. But a discussion should definitely start on this front. That is the concluding point that we can take away from this article.